The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Few of us have previously seen economic conditions as dramatically awful as the ones we're living through right now. Is this moment of upheaval an opportunity to improve capitalism so that it spreads the wealth more fairly? Well, tonight, business thinker and author Roger Martin explains why ending the obsession with economic efficiency would make for a good start. Then, we broaden that conversation in search of solutions to help democratize modern capitalism. It's Monday, November 23rd, and that's next on The Agenda. For much of the 20th century, the dynamism and productivity of American capitalism was the envy of the world. It yielded a buoyant middle class and opportunities for every strata of society to do better than their parents had done. That seems no longer to be the case. Roger Martin is a leading global thinker in business management, and his new book offers an idea of why that is. It's called When More is Not Better: Overcoming America's Obsession with Economic Efficiency. He's a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management and joins us now from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. How you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks.
I want to just take our viewers and you through a couple of graphs that are in your book here, and I'll describe them in some detail for those listening on podcast who can't see them. So, Sheldon, let's bring up the first graph here. This is average income by percentile off the top here. And we've got a typical graph with a bunch of lines on it. The lines across the bottom, which represent the bottom 90% of income earners, basically are basically flat with a little bit of movement in them. But the top 0.01% of income earners, those lines are going straight up to heaven. So that indicates, obviously, that the richest among us have done very well over the last 100 years. If we go to the second graph, this one is about productivity growth and hourly compensation. This is in the United States, and it's about the last 75 years or so. And again, the net productivity is a pretty good steady line going northeast, if I can put it that way. But hourly compensation from about 1970 on just flat lines, lags. It goes up a little bit, but it basically lags behind. So let's start here. What's the overarching story in your view that these two graphs tell?
Well, there's been a disconnect between how the economy as a whole is doing and how the average American or the median American is doing. And so it used to be that those two were very connected. And that productivity graph is a good example of that. Productivity and wages rose almost exactly, it was almost eerily equal. So that if a worker became more productive, he or she was going to feel it in their paycheck in a positive way. And then around the mid-70s, early 70s, mid-70s, there was just a complete change in that relationship, so that, as you said, productivity kept going up. So the economy kept doing just fine, but that worker didn't get the payoff. And then it shows up in the earlier graph, which is around that same time, the earnings, the wealth of the top 1%, top 0.01% started skyrocketing. So the gains from economic growth started to go almost exclusively to those at the top end of the economy, as opposed to going broadly across the economy.
Now, the point, one of the points your book makes is that this is obviously unfair in terms of economic performance, but it's also, you suggest, a problem for democracy. How so?
Well, if you think about it, that great middle class that's sort of the underpinning of every advanced democratic capitalist country also happens to be the swing voter. Right? If you think about the median family, the 50th percentile, in some sense, the government in power needs to have that voter on its side, or at least the voters in that narrow band around it. And if suddenly that narrow band has stopped advancing, they may fundamentally ask, hey, why am I continuing to vote for the continuation of this thing that isn't working for me, isn't working for my family anymore? And if that happens, you'll have an electorate saying, well, maybe we'll try something else. It happened, in the Great Depression, right? In the Great Depression, which was a worldwide phenomenon in advanced countries around the world, much of Europe, much of the Far East went either fascist, socialist, or communist during that period. So when you have a middle class that says this isn't working for us anymore, they're prone to try other things.
Well, okay, but the conventional wisdom has always been, yeah, but that could never happen over here. The terrible recession of the 1980s didn't result in a change of style of government. The Great Recession of 15 years ago didn't result in a change of style of government. Here we are again with the economic dislocation caused by COVID. We don't see people, clamoring in the streets for a change of, I don't mean a change of party, I mean like literally a change in the system by which we are governed. Are you concerned that could no longer be the case?
Yeah, and I think, Steve, if you look at the polls that question people about how about socialism, they have higher favorability than ever before in America, and it ain't even close. So I think it's upon us, to be honest. And I think the kind of progressive side of the Democratic Party is an exemplar. It's saying, man, capitalism. Hey, that doesn't really work so well anymore. Let's try something else. Now, I'm not saying that the Democrat elected president necessarily believes that, but boy, the polls, especially among young people, say we'd be game to try something else. There's a great debate about whether or not the economy is like a machine or whether it's a living organism, and you weigh in this. In your book on this issue. Where do you come down and why? Well, I think it is a natural system, a living organism. And I think, to be honest, there isn't a hell of a lot of debate on it. The dominant view is it's a machine. And this is what's happened over the last 50 or 60 years is that economists have been treating it more like it's a machine. You can break it down into its pieces. You figure out what lever to pull, and you do this macro policy or this fiscal stimulus, and you expect to get this, and it just isn't. And I think the degree to which economists have been so dead wrong on their predictions is indicative of the fact that even though it may appear to them to be machine-like, it just really isn't. The relationships between the pieces of the economy are one big system, and it's complex in that it's really hard to tell what is going to be the effect of a cause that you attempt to make happen. Give us an example, then, of how you see it being more a living organism than machine. Well, I think we can't forecast what's going to happen when we make economic moves, and that's because it is sufficiently complex. The other thing is it's adaptive, right? Machines don't adapt, right? A car doesn't decide, oh, you push on the gas pedal quite a bit, and so I'm going to kind of ameliorate the degree to which that moves us forward quickly because you're dangerous, right? It's a machine, but the economy constantly adapts. Whatever we put in place, economic actors adapt to it in ways that are unexpected. So the Fed decided after the dot-com bust in 2001-2 to have really low interest rates to stimulate the economy. Well, it thought that would stimulate the economy, but it didn't consider the fact that it would also cause the housing bubble. It would cause people to start giving out cheap mortgages, and that cheap mortgage business was a good business for the originator. And we got inflated prices, subprime mortgages, and a big blow up. That wasn't at all what the economists thought would happen, because they didn't understand that natural systems are adaptive. The players in the system don't just sit there and say, oh, you've changed the rules and I'm not going to do anything. No, you changed the rules and I'm going to exploit the rules to the maximum extent I can, is the reaction. And so those are features. The complexity, you can't tell cause and effect so easily, adaptivity, that aren't assumed in the machine models that economists and government policymakers tend to use.
But it has been, has it not, one of the great economic truisms ever since the Canadian-American Free Trade Agreement in the late 1980s, that freer trade with fewer tariff barriers, et cetera, is good for everybody. And I can remember the Conservatives obviously winning that election in 1988. And then when the Liberals came in 1993, they agreed. And they essentially said, yeah, we were wrong. This is, in fact, the way to go. Are we now saying that that dogma is no longer the case?
Yep. I mean, and that's the darn thing about data, right? It just turns out that it isn't good for everyone, right? So the notion that freer trade has its advantages is unquestioned. Right, David Ricardo was right when he wrote this so many years ago, 200 years ago. But we now have much better data that suggests that employees in the industries that are most affected by free trade never get back to the income level that they previously had. So there are pluses and minuses. Does that mean you shouldn't have trade? No, but don't mechanistically think that it will always be better for everybody. That was a fallacy. Now, do I think people were lying about it? No. I think they just had this belief, as economists do, in these models that say, oh, this is what's going to happen. We know this is going to happen. And some things were right and some things were wrong. And that is the nature of complex systems, is the unintended consequences are often as big, if not bigger, than the intended consequences. Well,
Jeff Rubin, the former chief economist, big bank chief economist, was on this program not too long ago, in which he was saying, yeah, it's been proven that if you have freer trade and you take down the tariffs and so on, you'll get a bigger economic pie. He said, but just don't, in fact, he's saying much of the same thing you are. He's saying don't be dissuaded from the notion, however, that everybody's going to benefit equally. Clearly, the rich got richer. And he doesn't blame that. He blames weak governments for refusing, I guess, to implement policies that would have leveled the playing field some more. Do you agree with him on that?
Yes. Now, I haven't read what he said about that particular thing. He's a smart guy, and from what you say, yes, it sounds like he has concerns that are similar to my concerns. You can't just take these big master moves. I'm going to pull this lever, and then assume that the consequences you expected are the only consequences you get. You get those, and you get some other ones.
In which case, if we need a new path going forward, I'd like to hear your advice for a variety of players in the economy. Let's start with business executives. What do they need to be doing differently going forward if we're going to have a fairer, more democratic universe?
Well, one thing is to treat their organizations more like a natural system rather than a machine, and not to try and do two things. One, get rid of all slack. Right. So to try and pursue efficiency by getting rid of what they think of as all slack. So if they think, well, we're paying our workers more than the absolute minimum we could pay if we went and got people at minimum wage. No, that's not going to result in better performance for you. It'll result in worse worker performance, more turnover, et cetera. So think about having a balance between driving for efficiency and understanding the broader system you're operating in. So Costco would be considered by many to be grossly inefficient in what it pays its workers. It pays its workers in excess of $20 an hour to start in jurisdictions in the U.S. where minimum wage is $11, $12 an hour, and most people in retail start out at minimum wage. But Costco is way more successful than all of their competitors. I mean, way more successful. And it's not that they're in some high-end business, they're in the club store business. But what they realize is that actually paying more gets you better workers who come to work more capable of doing great work, and they put slack in the system. They say, we're going to not have the most efficient store algorithm staffing levels. We'll just add a slush factor so that you'll get served really well. So business people have to understand that the system is more complex, and breaking it into silos which is the reductionist way business works, breaking things into silos. You're responsible for labor costs. Oh, you're responsible for customer service. That kind of siloization, which is machine-like. You can break a machine into its pieces and optimize each, doesn't optimize business. And it also has this side effect of driving down kind of the livelihoods of the average workers, and that makes democratic capitalism kind of harder to be sustainable.
And when the business executive goes to her annual shareholder meeting and the shareholders say, yeah, okay, I get you, you're all into this new touchy-feely stuff, but you're not maximizing my shareholder value here, and that's the business you're supposed to be in, what does that executive say back?
I think the executive says those two things are not in conflict. Check out Costco, check out Trader Joe's, check out Four Seasons. These are places that have a more holistic view. It's not so much, and I know you're being a bit facetious, touchy-feely. It isn't. It actually isn't. It is being much more sensible and understanding that the way the world works, rather than modeling it in this artificial way. And by the way, Steve, there is no evidence, right? There is no evidence that the pursuit of shareholder value maximization results in shareholder value maximization. Isn't that interesting? You'd think it would, but it doesn't. It's like Aristotle said many, many years ago, if a man sets out to seek to be happy, he's unlikely to end up happy. If he sets out to live a good life of servitude to his fellow man, he's likely to end up happy. That's the story with shareholder value maximization. It's one of the great myths of business in the late 20th century, that saying you want to maximize shareholder value does not positively correlate with achieving shareholder value maximization.
Okay, I'm going to ask this next question without being needlessly provocative this time. And that is...
No,
okay.
I like it.
Okay, that's advice for business leaders. How about advice for political leaders? What do they need to know now?
Well, I think what they need to understand is that they are operating in a complex adaptive system, and they should, rather than thinking that they can make master strokes that fix problems, they should think that their job is to keep on tweaking and improving. And as part of that, they should write the need for revision into every piece of legislation. So one of the worst things that happens in the world of government is that they fight and fight and fight and fight and fight over a given piece of legislation, and then they make that forever. And you can understand why it happens. It takes so long to fight about it that they want to make it last forever. But here, Canada provides a great example. 1871, 4 years into our the creation of our country, the Bank Act was passed, and it is in kind of North American terms, it is vast. So the Bank Act is bigger than like probably a dozen U.S. financial services regulations all put together. So it's super, super important. And they wisely put in place the requirement for a review and revision of the Bank Act every 10 years. It was brilliant. Right? Basically, it was like, hey, we don't know what's the economic system is going to be, the situation is going to be, how banks perform 10 years from now. Let's make sure we review it. And it actually was so favorably received over time that it was shrunk to 5 years in 1992. Now, what was a huge difference between the U.S. and Canada during the global financial crisis? We didn't melt down, and the U.S. did. Its system did. Well, they had an old, dilapidated, and rigid regulatory structure. We had one that had been reviewed and revised within the previous 5 years, and that should happen for everything, literally everything. Every single thing that we pass should have this automatic revision.
How about advice for educators who are still in the business schools of this country teaching people that the economy is a machine, and if you pull this lever, this will happen?
Yeah, I think we've just got to get out of the reductionist mode of education. I mean, business education is this way, but education in general. We are creating people who are adept at managing something that doesn't matter. a piece of the puzzle as if the rest of the puzzle does not exist. As the great Peter Drucker, the greatest management thinker of all time, said, there are no marketing problems, there are no accounting problems, there are no tax problems, there are just business problems. Yet we teach the former and not the latter. And we start out in the elementary school system. We start out teaching perfection, right? We teach that there's a right answer and a wrong answer. Right? And you get a check mark if it's the right answer, or a gold star if it's the right answer, and an X or a red X if it's the wrong answer. That, for the vast majority of the world, is not how the world works. There are only good answers and bad answers, better answers and worse answers. We taught Newtonian physics as if for over a century, as if it was fact, right? Well, it wasn't. It was pretty good. But Einstein came along and said, well, here's how you could make it even better, even more accurate. Let's stop trying to teach perfection and certainty, and let's teach that you have to be ready to keep on revising and enhancing what you know and what you learn.
Professor Martin, let's finish up on this. I don't have to tell you that you are spitting into a gale force wind that has been gathering steam for many, many decades right now. What kind of hope do you have that you're going to be able to convince people to think about these issues differently from the way they have for the last half century or more?
It's going to take a while. So my view is, my favorite here is Thomas Kuhn, the Structure of Scientific Revolutions guy, who said, theories get ensconced in the world. They build over time until people all believe in the given theory, and then anybody who says otherwise gets dismissed and excluded from the conversation. But the friend of new theories is anomalies, when things creep up and show their faces, and the current theory cannot explain them. And if enough of these anomalies show up, people start to say, well, maybe, just maybe we need to have a different theory. I think we're getting now enough anomalies that is now going to happen, but it's going to take 10 years. In my view, of more anomalies where economists are dead wrong. We're getting the kind of income distribution that we didn't expect and didn't think should happen for this proverbial worm to turn. But I'm optimistic that it will in due course.
Well, we're not only going to watch this with great interest, but we're actually going to discuss it with 3 other guests for the rest of the program here. So we thank you so much for getting it started. When more is not better, overcoming America's obsession with economic efficiency. From the former dean of the Rotman School of Management at U of T, that's Roger Martin. Thanks so much for joining us on TVO tonight.
Anytime, Steve. Thank you so much.
Beyond the obvious problems with economic inequality for people trying to make ends meet, such gaps can also seed serious political problems, even, as some recent polling indicates, undermining confidence in both democracy and capitalism. With us now to explore that and look for some solutions, we welcome, in Dundas, Ontario, Michael Veal. He's a professor of economics at McMaster University. And in Ontario's capital city, in Seton Village, Shannon Lee Simmons, financial planner at the New School of Finance. And in the Witchwood neighborhood in Midtown, there's Brian Milner, freelance business and economics writer. And it's great to have you 3 on our program tonight, following up on the conversation we just had with Roger Martin. And perhaps that's a good spot to start. I wonder if I could get each of you just to pluck one thing out of that interview that you either want to refer to, agree with, disagree with, amplify. Let's start right there. Shannon Lee Simmons, get us started, if you would.
I loved it. I thought it was really refreshing to hear somebody say that the economy is a living organism and not a machine, and we need to stop treating it in such ways, and that, bottom line profits for shareholders is not healthy for the greater economy and the average person, and definitely eroding the middle class. It's really refreshing to hear someone say that.
Brian Milner, your take.
Well, I always love a good critique of neoclassical economics, and Roger does it as well as anybody. And the fact is that all these models, which politicians and others have relied on, don't really work. And he gives a good explanation of why, and that's because the economy is not a machine. And I thought that was the key point in his book and also in your conversation.
I'm leaving the economist who is influencing the minds of the young economists and business people of the future to the end here. Michael, are you part of the solution or part of the problem here?
Oh, probably a little bit of both. I think in terms of what Professor Martin said, I did have to take exception to when he was arguing that Costco not paying low wages was thought of as inefficient. No one would think of that as inefficient. It's efficient because, of course, they're getting very productive workers in return. And economists don't argue that low wages by themselves are inefficient. That's, I think, just not true. But, more broadly, what it took away, and I actually had the benefit of reading the book as well, is that there is a very American part of this book, and that Canada is different in important ways. So in the interview, for example, he took the Bank Act of Canada as an example of something that Canada is doing right. There's lots of other examples, from the higher rate of voter registration to even the shout out to the teacher, Beth Grosso in Hamilton, Ontario, about how well she's doing. And so lots of good examples about Canada. I think that's important to remember, that we're not the same as the United States.
Full disclosure, since you mentioned the name Beth Grosso, she's my sister-in-law, and I actually didn't know she was going to be part of that book until I read it myself. So there you go, surprise, surprise. But yeah, she comes off very nicely in this book as someone who does what she does distinctly and very, very well. But you've anticipated nicely where I wanted to go next, and Brian, I'll put that to you, which is, America is in the title of the book. And I need to know from you whether or not the problems that he's identified in this book are as problematic in Canada as they are down south.
Well, I don't think they are, because for one thing, the income gap in Canada has never been as wide as it's been in the States going back more than 100 years. I also think that because we do have a national health care system, it sort of protects people at the bottom in a much better way than the U.S. does. And I also have to say that in terms of democratic capitalism, there are other models that work better than what Roger is describing in the U.S. And I think of Scandinavia as an example where, they have a democratic socialist model, but they're still capitalist countries. The fact is that if you live in Sweden, it's easier for you to become wealthy than it is in the United States. And those are points that, of course, he doesn't get to in the book, because the focus really is on the U.S.
So there's a lot more financial mobility in Scandinavia than there is over in North America. Is that the point?
Considerably more financial mobility and even more social mobility, which is sort of blows up that myth that the U.S. has always lived on, that they have the best mobility and the easiest path for every citizen to become wealthy. That hasn't been true for a long time. Michael, you wanted to follow up?
Well, I think that's a good point Brian makes about intergenerational mobility. In fact, it's significantly higher in Canada than the United States as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask our director here, Sheldon Osmond, to put up a graph, and then Shannon, I'll get you to speak to it first. This is essentially, it was tweeted out by the Financial Times back on November 17th. And essentially, again, I'm going to describe this a bit for people who can't see it and who are listening on podcast. It seems that the older you are, the more you are satisfied with democracy. So if we go to the top right corner of this graph, you see a blue squiggly line there, the interwar generation, 1918 to 1943, high levels of satisfaction. Baby boomers are the next ones down, 1944 to 64. Again, pretty decent level of satisfaction with the way democracy works. But then we get into younger groups. Generation X, 1965 to 1980, less and less satisfaction. And the millennials, born 1981 to 1996, considerable dissatisfaction with the way society works. Shannon, I guess I want to know from you, do you believe, based on your interactions with this generation, that they, it's legitimate for them to feel that way?
It's a great question. I think everyone loves the idea of critical thought in a democracy, but I think specifically to democratic capitalism, this was even mentioned in the interview, that something is not working. So people are being left behind, and the younger generation is feeling that polarization of the wealthy getting wealthy and the monopolies that have been created with big, huge, massive corporations. And they're feeling like they don't have the same hope. They're not going to do better than their parents' generation, which is this massive shift that's happened. And so I do agree that the younger generations, and even into Gen X and the conversations that I'm having on the front line of financial planning, there is a disillusionment with the current system. And to the interviewer's point, when people are disillusioned and things become polarized, people want to try new things. And I think that I agree with that. And I hear it often, all the time. And people are nervous about the future.
SLS, can I just do a follow-up with you on that? Among your younger clientele, the pandemic and the economic impact it's had on them? What are you seeing?
Polarizing as well. So there are the haves and the have-nots. So I had over 350 meetings since lockdown on March 12th. And the people who were able to just switch remotely, work right away and not have their income disrupted. So typically, professional jobs, people who already maybe had stable incomes versus people who maybe were already in the gig economy or working in retail and their jobs were completely changed overnight. And some people's industries were taken off the table altogether. And we all know that your best asset is your future income. And I would say half my clients right now don't know what their future income looks like. That is all kinds of instability, because how can you make a plan or 3 days from now, let alone 3 years from now? So again, it's that polarizing nature of people who have it and people who don't. And I'm seeing, even over the 12 years that I've been on the front line of financial planning, that divide is getting greater and greater, especially with generational wealth.
Brian, can I get you to react to that tweet that we put up a while ago, that the older you are, the more satisfied you are with the way democracy works? The younger you are, the less satisfied you are. How concerned should we all be about those numbers?
Well, I think the numbers are accurate. I think if you talk to anybody these days in their 20s, especially if they've just come out of university in the middle of this pandemic, they have real concerns about how they're going to manage, and their incomes are uncertain. Their job prospects are really uncertain these days. And they are disillusioned because they were promised something better many years ago. But I think it's also true that older people who are happier with democratic capitalism are older people who are pretty well off. If you go to older poor people, they're just as miserable as everybody in the younger set. So I don't think it's widely true.
Michael, what's your reaction to all that?
So I think Brian and Shannon both make great points, but if we think about it from the younger generation, not only are they coming now to a time with poor job prospects, even harder to get a good job, but also it's harder and harder for them to get a house. And we're saddling them with the debt that's paying off the costs of the COVID crisis. So it's not surprised they're disaffected.
Since we have a good economist/professor here who teaches this stuff, let's do a little Economics 101. And Michael, I'm going to put you to work on this one here. I would like you, I don't want to assume that everybody who's watching this right now understands the responsibility of central banks and what they do, what their role is in our economy. So let's do two things here. Number one, tell us what it is. And then number two, tell us whether you think that the policies that they have pursued, namely very cheap money. If you want to borrow money, it's never been cheaper in our lifetimes than to do it right now. It's great if you've got money. It's great if you can play the markets. It's great if you want to buy a house. But for a lot of people, it's leaving people behind. That's your assignment. Go.
All right. So the first part about that is what the Bank of Canada does. And of course, they responded to this crisis, as is always the case in an economic recession, by cutting interest rates. I think it can be overestimated how much it's what they did, and the market would have done some of this on its own, because every time the economy goes into a recession, interest rates are going to fall. They've gone very low, and that's supported a lot of economic activity. The Bank of Canada's mandate is to try to keep the inflation rate at 2%, so a stable rate of inflation. We're now below that, so they're going to pursue expansionary policy, because that higher rate of inflation will be part of an economy that's moving a little better than the economy is moving right now. The other thing that you mentioned, I mean, there was a lot there, but think about the housing market. Have we really made it easier for people to buy houses? What's happened, of course, is that interest rates are lower, and that helps. But housing prices, if anything, have gone up. And one of the things of the low interest rate policy over the last several years is it's been fueling a housing price boom. So it's not always the case that the low interest rates help people get into the housing market.
Yeah, Brian, can you follow up on that? It has been one of the perversions of low interest rates, that rather than making it easier for younger people to get into the housing market and get that first home, it's just sent the price of houses through the roof in many locations in Ontario, and it's made it even tougher for young people to get in.
It is very true that it's very tough for first-time buyers, but it's been tough in the past when interest rates were very high, and young people had trouble scraping together down payments, and historically they've had to rely on parents or other people helping. There was a big second mortgage market that's still out there. But for people who already are in the housing market, low interest rates are helping them move up, and also they're moving out. They're leaving places that are very high costs like Toronto and Vancouver. And lately, as the Globe has reported, there's been a flood of people moving into the Maritimes, not Maritimers, but people from Ontario who say, wait a minute, for $500,000, I can get a really great house in New Brunswick, and that'll cost me 4 times as much in Toronto.
And Shannon, again, for your younger clients who are finding it next to impossible to get into the housing market, how much does that contribute to their sense of, I don't know, economic untethering that they're no doubt feeling right now?
I think it's huge. The housing piece is always a big one. And when you're younger and renting, it's one thing to say, well, one day I'll own a house. And then as you get older and older, and that feels like it's an impossible goal, people become really frustrated about that because we've seen the housing market boom. And so if you're not being a part of that economic boom for yourself, then you feel even more left out of what is potentially economic growth. And a lot of times millennials believe that owning a home is the best way to build wealth over a lifetime versus, maybe investing in the stock market and all those things that you can still do while renting. The housing market has this luster, and you can also live there. So there's home stability, and you're not going to get evicted at any time soon. I definitely think that the first-time home buyer piece is such a tough one for young people, and the amount of parental help and family gifting that I've seen over the years it's always been there, but it's becoming more and more necessary for people who want to buy.
But if that's the case, then can we say that, I'm not doubting what you're saying, but I do want to follow up in as much as if the older generation is helping the younger generation get into the housing market, then maybe this issue of economic untethering isn't as significant as we think? I don't know. You tell me.
Well, only some people have parents who can help. So
Sure.
Think about all the people who are not benefiting from that generational wealth. So this is a class issue. This is a race issue. There's so many things that are fraught with the people who have it, keeping it and giving it to their children, and a whole slew of other people who are left behind and left out.
Michael, I want to, we touched on this a bit earlier, but I'd like to come back to it and maybe go into a little more depth here. This issue of social mobility. And we've established the fact, I guess, that Canada may be better than the United States on this, but the Scandinavian countries may be better than we are at it. As you look around the world, who's doing social mobility well right now, if anybody?
Well, actually, Canada did it, in my view, very well. But it's probably deteriorating now. And the reason it's deteriorating is that some of the issues that have just been mentioned, that more and more it depends on whether you grew up in a family of means or whether you did not, because that gives you access to the housing market, that gives you access to certain sorts of educational opportunities and job opportunities. So I worry that this is what's fraying in the Canadian fabric, that the problem of social mobility is one that I think that we were in a pretty good place, but I'm not sure going forward we can stay there.
Brian, does any social mobility happen at all during a pandemic? In other words, has it basically been status quo for the last 9 months?
Well, I think that's one of the big issues. For one thing, it's people can't move around, and for another, the job market has become so uncertain across the country. So when you had a case of a really struggling have-not area, people could move. People moved from the Maritimes to Toronto originally many years ago, and then they started moving west when the oil boom hit in Alberta. Those opportunities have pretty much dried up, and a lot of people who had moved are now moving back, and they don't have great job prospects even going back home. So I think it is a major factor.
One of the criticisms I occasionally get in hosting this program is some people do say to me from time to time, boy, you spend a lot of time identifying problems and really, going into depth about what the problems are, but you don't spend enough time telling us how we're going to get out of these difficulties. So to those people who have that criticism, this is your moment, because we are going to spend the next 15 minutes talking about if, in fact, we've identified the problem correctly, as it seems we have, how we're going to get out of this mess. You've heard Roger Martin earlier in the program talk about all the different stakeholders involved and what role each of them has to play in getting us to a better place. So let's start there. What prospects, and Shannon Lee Simmons, why don't I go to you first on this? What do you see as being achievable of the solutions that Roger mentioned earlier in the program?
I love when he brought in business executives and what they can do without chasing shareholder profit at the bottom line, and how that doesn't really work. And so I think I would love to see employers taking ownership over their employees, more, taking financial planning and financial wellness seriously, doing more employer plans. That's been proven to be one of the best ways to drive savings and wealth is when it happens at source through your employer. So seeing that across the board, much more of that to help people save. I would also like to see wages go up and not that efficiency at all costs. So paying fair wages, having benefit programs for people. I think there's so much that can happen at the employer level if we're not just always trying to cater to the shareholder at the end of the day.
Can I do a quick follow-up with you on that, in as much as why would an employee not say to an employer who was genuinely trying to help with some financial planning and so on, why would they not say, mind your own damn business. Your job is to pay me. My job is to give you an honest day's work for that wage. And I don't want to hear anything more.
Yeah. So I think if an employer is offering a company share plan where they do some sort of matching or they do automatic deductions and an employee wants to opt out of it, I mean, it's a free world. So do your thing. But it has been proven over and over again that those who enroll in employee deduction programs end up saving more because it happens before the money even hits your checking account and it's automatic and it's happening behind the scenes. And if there's employer matching that goes along with that, as well as a benefit program, you're setting someone up for success in a way that without that, they have to do it all by themselves and the wages are stagnating and it's really hard. So I think that automated and automatic savings happening at the employer level would really make a huge difference.
And in your experience, employees are open to that kind of advice?
Oh, yeah.
They are.
I mean, most people brag about it. It's something at dinner parties like, well, I've got a benefit plan. Do you? Like, I'm not kidding. Because I think that, back in the 70s and 80s, we had you could get the company pension plan. You were on the track and you could be a company person. You just had to show up. And just to the interview as well, we were tied to economic growth and the average median wage. Well, that's not the case anymore. So I don't understand why people are always voting when it's like economic growth. Well, does economic growth serve you? Let's think about that before we vote. And let's think about that when you're choosing an employer. And the problem too is that I find the job market is tighter and tighter. And so people are more and more desperate to take whatever job they can. So the employers are getting more and more power.
You mentioned two words there that I don't think I know what these are anymore. Dinner party? What's that?
Yeah. Well, they're on Zoom now.
Right. Oh, that. Okay, I get it. That I understand. Okay, let's go to Michael Veal on this one. From the prescriptions that you heard from Roger Martin, what do you think's achievable?
Oh, there's a lot. His book, in fact, is very complex and it goes in lots of different directions. I sometimes worry a little that what might be achievable for some of the firms he chooses as examples that have done very, very well by pursuing these sorts of high wage, high productivity policies, whether that could be generalized to the economy as a whole. But I do think there is something there. I do think that one of the things that he really emphasizes in all his work is that the value of businesses being operated by sound business principles, trying to produce better products that better satisfy customers and not worrying so much about the gaming and the informational side. So I remember, for example, a review of one of his earlier books by Arianna Huffington, worried about that we've gone from an economy of making things to an economy of making things up. That is, that business leaders deceive, and that leads to serious problems with the way both the economy handled the previous recession in 2008 and as we go forward, where there needs to be more trust between workers and firms.
Brian, in your view, what's achievable?
Well, I think almost everything he proposes is achievable. And as he points out in the book, all of it's been tried someplace at some point, and some of it is being implemented now successfully. What I really liked is the fact that he's not proposing wide sweeping changes that would be politically impossible anyway, and which business would likely reject. He's proposing incremental things, and he's proposing some things that are long overdue, like, for instance, his emphasis on antitrust toughness, which has sort of gone by the wayside. And in Canada, it's, of course, the Competition Tribunal that deals with that stuff. And the fact that it's allowed monopolistic type practices, which have really caused a lot of damage in both our countries.
Well, I asked the question, Brian, because he did say at the end of the interview, it's going to take a decade to change the way people think about this issue. Now, if it's going to take a decade, that doesn't sound to me like this is so readily achievable, unless I'm missing the mark here. What do you think?
Well, he uses the Rotman School, where he was a dean for so many years, as an example. It took 15 years, but by the time he finished there, the changes were so incremental that a lot of people didn't even notice, and they kept approving it all the way. Had he tried to bring in drastic measures to change the way you were teaching business, he would have run into incredible opposition, and he managed to avoid that with the methods he was employing.
All right, let's try again, and I'm going to hit on this again, this notion that this may take a decade to do, because I think we've all learned along the way that monopolies are not necessarily the best thing for dynamic democratic capitalism. And yet, Amazon, Facebook, Google, I mean, they're not technically monopolies, but they're virtual monopolies in the space in which they inhabit. And I guess, Michael, I'll go to you on this. How have they been allowed to happen? How is that consistent with democratic capitalism?
Well, it is a challenge. And I do think that even as we think about a 10-year horizon, we shouldn't let short-termism, just the very short-termism we criticize corporate leaders for, we shouldn't let that govern our political process either. We do have to think in terms of 10 years or more. I am actually probably a little less concerned about those monopolies. I do think that there needs to be more role for government intervention in some cases. But the reason, of course, we have a Google monopoly is that it makes sense for us to have one place where this information is gathered. He would argue, perhaps, I think, this is Professor Martin, that makes our system less resilient. But there are competitors in the background. If Google falters, there'll be another one there.
Okay, Shannon, I want to revisit that issue that you raised a moment ago about the role of companies in helping their employees do their financial planning and be on more solid financial footing. Can you tell me, I get why that's a good idea for employees to avail themselves of if they feel they need it. What's in it for the companies to do that, in your view?
I think it would be company like employee retention. You would get a higher caliber, just similar to the Costco story. You get a higher caliber of employee, less turnover, and those are all efficiencies that can be created within your company that also help the greater picture, because you don't always want that race to the bottom with employees and turnover, which is really disruptive. So I think that would be maybe the enticing thing to a business owner to implement those things to attract better talent.
Do you see a need for legislation in this area?
It's interesting. I think that would be hard to do unless it was incremental and over time. Over the next 10 years, I would love to see it. I would also, this is maybe controversial, I would love to see, a super wealth tax for billionaires 10 times over on those, people who own monopolies. And I think that there's a greater resource sharing that can also happen there in the greater scheme of things too. So I think that there is a role of government here to kind of slow down this have and have not divide that's happening. And I think if we look long term and we see that coming, we can make those small, meaningful, incremental changes now so that it doesn't shock people, but it's still moving us in the right direction, because I think where we're going is scary for many people.
Well, that leads me to revisit the point that Jeff Rubin was making in his book that I referenced earlier. The Expendables is the name of his book. He was on this program a few weeks ago talking about it. And his point is he doesn't really blame the trade deals and globalization for the way the world is right now. He blames governments. He blames politicians for the fact that they have not implemented the kind of tax policy required in order to level the playing field more equitably. So, Michael, I'll start with you on this one. Do we need, an inheritance tax? Do we need to be taxing the hell out of billionaires? What's your view on these issues?
So I do think that I was earlier saying that Canada is different from the United States, but we do have the same issue in that if you look over the last 40 years, median income went up, say 10%, and the income of people in the top 0.01%, 1 in 10,000, their income went up by a factor of 200%. So I do think that this is something we need to think about. Unfortunately, my own work seems to suggest that if you increase taxes at the top end, you're not actually going to get a lot more revenue. That we not quite yet, but we're pretty close to have maxed out what we can get from taxing at the top end. I wish it were not so, but we have to realize that we live in a world where people can move their money to other locations or move themselves to other locations, and I think that's part of the problem.
So it's pointless to try?
No, I do think that we should be edging in that direction, particularly at this time. The governments have borrowed a lot of money. We need to do something on the revenue side, but I think very much incremental and not do anything radical.
Brian, I have this little factoid here that I want to share with you as I set up the next question. The wealthiest American is 10 million times richer than the median American. 10 million times richer. What does that suggest in terms of taxation policy?
Well, obviously, progressive taxation policy is one key to remedying that huge gap. For me, the fact that 1% of Americans control more than 30% of the wealth of their country, and in Canada it's a little bit better, but it's still about 25%. There's just no way to close the widening income gap as long as that exists. The real problem with implementing effective tax policy is getting rid of thousands of loopholes that enable people to move their money around so easily. One reason that happens and why politicians have let it happen is that millions and millions of dollars are being poured into lobby groups, especially in the States, but also here, fighting for all these gains. And if you're a politician and you're relying on huge amounts of money like that, it's going to affect your decision making. And they have to try to move some of that money out of the political system. That's really the only way to fix this.
Yeah, but the reality is that lobbyists are going to be able to have at politicians more easily than Mr. and Mrs. Everyday Ontario is going to be able to have access to them. And certainly if you're making a financial contribution to a politician, you're going to be listened to even more. What do we do about this?
That's true, but you could reduce the amount of money that pours into elections, for instance. You could restrict what donors can do, and you could certainly restrict how lobbyists operate. One of the examples that I like is the fact that just this month in California, there was a proposition put on the ballot to really strip all kinds of rights, labor rights away from people working in the gig economy. Well, that proposition was financed by $200 million worth of investment from major companies like in the high-tech sector and Uber, and they didn't like the fact that California was trying to impose fairly strict rules to make life easier for employees. When you can throw that kind of money into political campaigns as easily as they do, it really does affect the outcome.
Yeah, Michael, presumably you'd have to have, like every rich country in the world, quote unquote, in on this, right? Otherwise, if everybody's not going to play on the same hymn sheet here, if I can mix my metaphors, then if one government brings in taxation policy that a rich person finds abhorrent, they'll just take their money somewhere else, right?
Yeah, so the tax haven problem is a complex one, and we've just talked about how difficult it is to deal with such complex issues for governments, and so that's part of the constraint. But I do share the problem. There is a problem with money in politics, and how that can affect the democracy. It's just, unfortunately, there's no easy answers.
Okay, let's in our last few minutes here do one more thing, and that is Craig Alexander. Was on this program not too long ago. He of Deloitte, an economist there, and was talking about there being a silver lining, during the course of this pandemic, in as much as, well, what's the old expression? You never let a good crisis go to waste. Let's see what he's got to say. Sheldon, if you would.
Ontario and Canada was not on the road to prosperity pre-COVID. Right? We were having slowing trend rates of economic growth that were going to mean that standards of living weren't going to rise more than 1% a year. And that means that Ontarians wouldn't feel like they're getting ahead. And this is how you get political outcomes you don't want, like Brexit and Trump. So, we really need to change the trajectory. And the great thing about, the silver lining of the pandemic is that it's creating the opportunity to have a really constructive conversation around change. How do we build a more prosperous future? How do we break down barriers facing our people? How do we attract more investment? How do we get more capital spending? How do we boost economic growth?
Shannon, all good questions. Are the right people talking about answers to those questions right now?
I don't know. I think that, the endless pursuit of economic growth and assuming that that is going to help the middle class and the average person is not accurate. I agree with that. And so, whenever I hear someone saying this is for, economic growth and it's to help the average Ontarian, it's like, is the system currently helping the average Ontarian? I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if it's just the rich getting richer. And so I think we just need to separate that out. The economic growth piece, like what GDP is doing, is not necessarily going to affect your raise or your bonus at the end of the year or your job opportunities. And so if it is, great, but let's actually make sure that the individual takes some ownership and accountability too here for their elected politicians and say, who's actually going to help me at my kitchen table at the end of the day, and not necessarily just what the economic forecasts are. I mean, I have my honors degree in economics. I understand it. But at the end of the day, I'm much more about that macro picture or the micro picture and how that's impacting us on a daily basis.
That's Shannon Lee Simmons. She's going to get the last word on today's program. She, a financial planner from the New School of Finance. Thanks as well to Brian Milner, the former senior economics writer and global markets columnist for the Globe and Mail, and Michael Veal, the professor of an academic director, at StatsCan Research Data Center, McMaster University, in what they used to call Dundas, but it's now all part of the beautiful city of Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Thanks to the three of you for being on the agenda tonight. It's great to see you all. And that is the agenda for Monday, November 23rd, 2020. Most people think of cats as domesticated, much-loved pets. But tomorrow, as TVO airs the world premiere of the documentary Running Wild, we'll find out how the eastern Ontario city of Cornwall is containing a real feral cat problem. I've seen the doc. It's great, and you'll want to watch. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
The Agenda is always on. To catch up on conversations from this week or any week, visit our website, tvo.org/theagenda, or our YouTube page at youtube.com/theagenda. It's all there for whenever you want to watch.